the gathering storm. The signal arrived on every inhabited world in the galaxy at the same moment. It cut through communication channels, bypassed security protocols, and displayed itself on screens from the oldest space stations to the newest colonial outposts. The message was simple, written in every known language simultaneously. Captain David Chun of the Human Diplomatic Corps was summoned to appear before the Galactic Confederacy within 7 standard days. Failure to comply would result in immediate sanctions against all human territories. David was in his office on Luna Base when the message appeared. He was 52 years old, with silver streaking through his black hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of too many negotiations and too little sleep. He had spent 30 years working between humans and aliens, first as a military officer during the border conflicts, then as a diplomat when humanity decided that talking was more profitable than fighting. He read the message twice, then leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He had known this day would come. Humanity had been expanding too quickly, asking too few permissions, and making too many older species nervous. The galaxy had rules, ancient protocols established millions of years before humans learned to make fire. These rules said that young species should move slowly, ask politely, and accept their place at the bottom of the hierarchy. Humanity had done none of these things. In 150 years since achieving faster-than-light travel, humans had established colonies in 43 star systems. The human population had grown from 12 billion to nearly 200 billion. Human ships moved through space lanes that older species considered their territory. Human traders competed for resources that had been monopolized for millennia. Human scientists made discoveries that challenged theories held sacred for eons. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy grew concerned. David opened his eyes and made a series of calls. The first was to the Secretary General of the United Earth Government, informing her of the summons. The second was to his wife, telling her he would be gone for a while. The third call was to a secure facility buried beneath the Antarctic ice, a place that appeared on no official records and employed people whose names were classified at the highest level. That conversation lasted exactly 45 seconds. "It is time," David said. "We anticipated this." The voice responded. "Guardian Protocol is ready for deployment if needed." David disconnected and began preparing for his journey. The central nexus was located near the Galactic Core, far from human space. It was a station built by the ancients, a species that had vanished 2 million years ago, but whose technology still surpassed anything the current civilizations could create. The Nexus served as a meeting place for the Galactic Confederacy, a coalition of 15 species that governed known space, according to laws written before humanity existed. The journey took 9 days in David's fastest ship. He spent the time reviewing everything humanity knew about the Confederacy species. The Krillians were insect-like creatures with rigid social hierarchies and perfect memory. The Vorn were massive beings made of living stone who thought in timescales of centuries. The Sether were energy beings who existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each species was older than humanity, more advanced in specific ways, and certain of their superiority. David studied their cultures, their fears, and their blind spots. He had learned long ago that every species, no matter how advanced, had weaknesses. The key was understanding what they valued and what they feared losing. As his ship approached the Nexus, David felt a familiar calm that came before important negotiations. Some people called it confidence. His old military instructors had called it combat readiness. The truth was somewhere in between. The central Nexus was enormous, a structure that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. It was shaped like a sphere with countless docking ports, each one designed for a different type of ship. Lights pulsed across its surface in patterns that conveyed information in dozens of languages simultaneously. Ships from across the galaxy came and went, representing trade missions, diplomatic envoys, and scientific expeditions. David guided his ship toward the human docking section, which was notably smaller than those reserved for elder species. As he stepped off his ship, he found them waiting. 20 guards stood in formation, representing 5 different species. They wore armor that could withstand starship weapons and carried rifles that could punch through reinforced hulls. At their center stood Ambassador Terex of the Krillian hierarchy, a being whose carapace gleamed with the iridescence of high rank and whose compound eyes reflected light in a way that suggested intelligence far beyond human standard. Captain Chun. Tarek spoke in perfect English, his mandibles clicking softly with each word. You will accompany us to the Confederacy chamber. Your hearing begins immediately. David raised an eyebrow. No time to rest after a 9-day journey? No opportunity to prepare defense? The customs usually allow for a period of adjustment. There will be no customs observed today. Tarek stepped closer, his antennae twitching. Your species has been judged, Captain. This hearing is merely a formality to deliver the verdict and discuss terms of compliance. David said nothing. He simply nodded and walked between the guards. They moved through corridors that had been ancient when humanity was still living in caves. The walls were covered in script from dozens of civilizations, some extinct, some thriving, all of them leaving their mark on this place of judgment and law. Other beings watched as the human passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt to something that might have been pity. The Confederacy chamber was designed to make visitors feel insignificant. David understood this the moment the massive doors opened before him. The ceiling rose so high that artificial clouds drifted near the top. The walls curved inward and were covered with holographic displays showing the history of galactic civilization, a history in which humanity appeared for only the briefest moment at the very end. The floor was made of the same dark material as the station itself, smooth and cold and older than any living species could comprehend. At the center of the chamber was a circle of white light. This was where David was meant to stand. Surrounding this circle, rising up in tiers like an ancient amphitheater, were 15 platforms. Each platform held a representative of one of the Confederacy species. David walked to the circle alone. The guards remained at the entrance. He was unarmed and unrestrained. The Confederacy wanted to demonstrate that they did not fear a single human, that his presence here was merely a courtesy before they imposed their will on his entire species. David stood in the circle and looked up at the 15 beings who held the power to shape the future of humanity. He saw Terex on his platform of crystalline structures that pulsed with data. He saw the Vorn representative, a massive being of living stone, who had not moved in 3 days and would not move for another 2. He saw the Sether delegate, a shimmer of energy contained in a field that prevented it from dispersing across dimensions. He saw representatives from species whose names humans struggled to pronounce, whose biology defied human understanding, and whose civilizations had been ancient when Earth was still molten rock. Ambassador Terex activated the central display. Images appeared in the air above the chamber, visible from every angle. Captain David Chin of the human species, he announced, his voice amplified to fill the enormous space. You stand before the Galactic Confederacy to answer for the actions of your kind. The evidence against humanity is extensive and disturbing. We will present this evidence now. You will have the opportunity to respond, though we remind you that the verdict has already been reached by unanimous decision of all 15 member species. David remained silent. His face showed no emotion. He had learned long ago that in negotiations, the first person to show fear had already lost. Terex pressed a control. The display changed to show maps of galactic space. Red markers appeared, spreading like infection across previously empty systems. In 150 years, humanity has expanded into 43 star systems. This expansion violates the Treaty of Controlled Development, which states that young species must limit their growth until they reach social maturity. Your rate of expansion suggests either ignorance of this law or deliberate defiance of it. David watched the red markers multiply. He said nothing. Terex continued. Human population growth is unsustainable and dangerous. You breed faster than any known species. Your numbers have increased by 1,600% in 150 years. If this rate continues, humans will outnumber the combined populations of 7 Confederacy species within 300 years. This is unacceptable. More images appeared. Human ships moving through space lanes, human traders in alien markets, human scientists presenting research at galactic conferences. Your species demonstrates a disturbing lack of respect for established protocols. Terex said, you enter territories without permission. You compete for resources without regard for existing agreements. You challenge scientific theories without sufficient credentials. You act as though you are equals to civilizations millions of years older than your own. the chamber filled with murmurs of agreement from the various platforms. David remained still, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression neutral. Terex pressed another control. The images that appeared now were different. They showed human soldiers in combat, medical scans of human biology, and psychological profiles that had been compiled over decades of observation. But most disturbing, Terex continued, is your species' biology and psychology. Humans possess regenerative abilities that our medical experts cannot fully explain. You recover from injuries that would be fatal to most species. You continue fighting through pain that would incapacitate any other known creature. You form emotional bonds with injured individuals and waste resources attempting to save those who cannot contribute to survival. The Vorn representative spoke for the first time, its voice like grinding rocks. Your species is irrational. You make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. You take risks that offer no calculable benefit. You sacrifice resources for abstract concepts like honor or loyalty. Our models cannot predict your behavior because your behavior does not follow rational patterns. This makes you dangerous. David finally spoke. His voice was calm and carried clearly through the chamber despite not being amplified. Dangerous to whom? The question seemed to surprise them. Terex recovered quickly. Dangerous to the stability of galactic civilization. Dangerous to the established order that has maintained peace for 2 million years. Dangerous to yourselves, as your own history demonstrates. He pressed another control, and new images appeared. Human warfare. Not the clean, strategic conflicts that Confederacy species engaged in, but something raw and brutal. Trenches filled with mud and bodies. Cities reduced to rubble. Weapons of mass destruction turning landscapes into wastelands. This is what humanity does to itself, Terex said. In your brief history, you have waged constant war. You have developed weapons capable of destroying your own planet. You have killed billions of your own kind over resources, territory, and ideas. And now you bring this violence into our galaxy. David watched the images of human conflict play across the chamber. He saw the faces of soldiers who had died in wars fought before he was born. He saw the aftermath of nuclear weapons, the twisted metal and ash that remained when cities burned. He saw humanity at its worst, and he felt no shame, because he knew something that the Confederacy did not. He knew that these images told only half the story. The Confederacy has reached its verdict, Terex announced. Humanity is guilty of uncontrolled expansion, violation of development protocols, and possession of a dangerous and unstable psychology. The sentence is as follows. All human colony worlds will be placed under Confederacy supervision. Human population growth will be limited through enforced reproductive restrictions. Human technology will be regulated, with any advances requiring Confederacy approval. Human military forces will be disbanded and replaced with Confederacy peacekeepers. He paused. These measures will remain in place for a minimum of 10,000 years, until such time as humanity demonstrates social maturity and psychological stability. The chamber waited. 15 species watched a single human standing in the circle of light. They expected protests, arguments, perhaps even threats. They had seen countless species stand in that same circle over millions of years. They knew how this went. David did none of what they expected. Instead, he smiled. It was a small smile, quiet and almost sad. But in the silence of that ancient chamber, surrounded by beings who had ruled the stars since before his species learned to use tools, that smile was the most unsettling thing any of them had ever witnessed. Ambassador Terex leaned forward on a platform. You find your subjugation amusing, Captain? David shook his head slowly. No, Ambassador. I find it interesting that you believe you can enforce it. He reached into his jacket. Every weapon system in the chamber activated instantly, all targeting him. He moved slowly and pulled out a small data device. This contains information that your intelligence services somehow failed to discover despite watching us for 150 years. Information about what humanity really is and what we are capable of when we stop being polite. He held up the device so all 15 platforms could see it clearly. You have studied us for a century and a half. You have observed our expansion, analyzed our biology, modeled our psychology. You have watched us from a distance and drawn conclusions based on incomplete data. He paused. You have made a terrible mistake. I am authorized to give you one opportunity to correct it. Take this data. Study it carefully. You have 48 hours. After that, you will release me, withdraw all supervision, and issue a formal apology. And then you will hope very sincerely that we accept it. The chamber exploded into chaos. 15 species began arguing simultaneously, their voices blending into a cacophony of alien languages and concepts. David stood calm in the center of it all, holding the data device steady. Finally, the Vorn representative spoke, its voice cutting through the noise like stone grinding against stone. And if we refuse? David met its gaze without flinching. Then you will learn why humanity survived every attempt by our own planet to kill us, why we thrived in environments that would destroy most life, why we built weapons capable of ending our own existence and chose not to use them. He lowered the device. You will learn what it means when a species bred in hell decides to stop pretending to be civilized. Terex signaled for silence, his compound eyes fixed on David with an intensity that would have made most beings uncomfortable. You threaten the Confederacy? David shook his head. I warn you, there is a difference. A threat implies intention. A warning implies choice. I am giving you a choice, Ambassador. Learn the truth and adapt, or maintain your ignorance and face the consequences. Your civilization has survived for millions of years by being wise. I suggest you continue that tradition. The Vorn representative made a sound like boulders rolling down a mountain. We will review your data. But understand this, human. If it contains any deception, any attempt at manipulation, your species will face consequences beyond your imagining. David placed the data device on the podium at the center of the chamber. He stepped back into his circle of light. There is no deception in truth, he said quietly, only revelation. And what you are about to learn will change everything you thought you knew about humanity. He looked up at the 15 species who held his fate and the fate of his people in their hands. The question is whether you have the wisdom to accept that change. Terex gestured to the guards. They came forward, and David allowed himself to be escorted from the chamber. As he walked through the ancient corridors back to his detention area, he thought about the data device he had left behind. He thought about Project Guardian and what it really meant. He thought about the choice humanity had made 150 years ago when they first reached the stars. And he wondered if the Confederacy would be wise enough to understand that the greatest threats often come not from those who cannot control their violence, but from those who choose every day not to unleash it. The next 48 hours would determine whether the galaxy learned that lesson through words or through demonstration. David hoped for their sake they chose words. The unveiled truth. The Confederacy Council assembled in their secure chamber exactly 1 hour after David Chun was escorted away. This room was different from the public chamber, where they passed judgment. It was smaller, designed for private deliberation, with walls that blocked all forms of surveillance and communication. The 15 species gathered around a circular table made from the same ancient material as the station itself. In the center of the table sat the data device that the human had left behind. Ambassador Terex picked up the device with careful movements. His species had evolved to be cautious, to examine everything from multiple angles before taking action. That caution had kept the Krillian hierarchy alive for 8 million years. We should scan this thoroughly before accessing its contents, he said. It could contain malware designed to compromise our systems. The Sether delegate shimmered with what might have been amusement. A single human diplomat infiltrating the most secure station in the galaxy with a computer virus? The probability approaches 0. The Vorn representative had not moved since entering the chamber. Its massive stone body remained perfectly still, as it had been for days, but its voice rumbled through the room like distant thunder. The human was not afraid. In all my centuries observing various species, I have learned that lack of fear indicates either foolishness or knowledge. That one did not appear foolish. The discussion continued for 20 minutes before they agreed to access the data. Terex connected the device to their isolated viewing system. A holographic display activated above the table, and the file directory appeared. It was organized simply, almost too simply. History, biology, psychology, military capacity, and one file labeled simply Guardian Protocol. Terex selected the history file first. The display changed, and suddenly they were looking at Earth. Not the green and blue planet that humanity currently called home, but something else entirely. The planet was white, covered in ice sheets that stretched from pole to pole. The temperature readings made several council members recoil. -50 degrees Celsius was considered average. In some regions, it dropped to -90. This is Earth during what humans call the Ice Ages. A voice said. It was David Chun, recorded specifically for this presentation. His face appeared briefly in the corner of the display before fading away. These conditions persisted for tens of thousands of years. Most complex life retreated to small pockets near the equator. Humanity not only survived but spread across the entire planet. The hologram showed small groups of humans moving across frozen landscapes. They wore animal skins and carried primitive tools. They hunted creatures 10 times their size with nothing but sharpened stones and coordinated tactics. They built shelters from ice and bone. They created fire in conditions where fire should not exist. When food was scarce, they traveled for weeks through blizzards that would have killed any other species in the Confederacy. They carried their elderly and their injured, refusing to abandon them despite the cost of their own survival chances. The Krillian species abandons non-productive members during resource scarcity. Terex said quietly, "It is logical and ensures colony survival." The hologram continued. It showed humanity developing agriculture in environments barely suitable for it. It showed them building civilizations in deserts, in jungles, on mountains, in swamps. Everywhere their planet tried to kill them, they adapted and thrived. The Voran representative spoke. Their adaptability is remarkable but not unprecedented. The Zen species colonized 7 different biome types on their homeworld. David's voice returned. The difference is that we did it all simultaneously while competing with ourselves. The hologram shifted to show human warfare, not the wars they had shown in the public chamber, but older conflicts. Bronze Age battles where thousands died in single afternoons. Medieval sieges where cities held out for years despite starvation. Naval battles where wooden ships loaded with gunpowder destroyed each other in storms. Humanity has been at war with itself for our entire existence, David's voice explained. We developed agriculture 10,000 years ago. We have been fighting organized wars for approximately 9,000 years. We have had perhaps 300 years of true global peace in our entire recorded history. The Council watched in silence as the history continued. They saw the world wars, conflicts that consumed entire continents and killed tens of millions. They saw the development of chemical weapons, biological weapons, and finally nuclear weapons. The hologram showed a city, a place called Hiroshima, before and after the atomic bomb. The transformation took seconds. Buildings became shadows. People became ash. A single weapon erased 100,000 lives in an instant. We built this weapon in 1945, David's voice said. By 1986, we had built more than 60,000 nuclear warheads. Enough to destroy every city on Earth multiple times over. Enough to render our planet uninhabitable for thousands of years. The Sether delegate flickered with agitation. Why would any species build such weapons? To use against external threats? The hologram answered. It showed 2 human nations, both armed with thousands of nuclear weapons, both pointing them at each other for 45 years. This period was called the Cold War. Both sides knew that if either attacked, both would be destroyed completely. They called this mutually assured destruction. They built their entire civilization around it. Children grew up learning what to do in case of nuclear attack. Cities had shelters. Governments had contingency plans. And yet daily life continued. People fell in love, raised families, built businesses, created art, all while living under the shadow of potential extinction. Ambassador Terex set down the viewing controls. His antennae were vibrating rapidly, a sign of deep distress. This is madness. No rational species would accept such conditions. The hologram shifted to show human cities at night, glittering with lights, full of people living normal lives despite the weapons pointed at them. We accepted it, David's voice said, because we had no choice. And because accepting the unacceptable is what humans do. We evolved doing it. We survived ice ages by accepting that most of us would die. We built civilizations by accepting that we would fight wars. We reached for the stars by accepting that the universe did not want us there. Acceptance is not weakness. It is our greatest strength. The history file ended. The council sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Terex opened the biology file. This section was more technical, filled with medical scans and genetic analysis. But the conclusions were clear and disturbing. Human healing rates exceeded any known organic species by factors of 3 to 5. Human pain tolerance was abnormally high, allowing them to continue functioning through injuries that would incapacitate others. Human adrenal systems could trigger temporary increases in strength and speed during stress, sometimes allowing them to perform physically impossible acts. The Vorn representative leaned forward, its massive stone body creating groaning sounds. They are essentially biological weapons. Evolution designed them to survive conditions that would kill most life. The hologram showed more data. Human emotional capacity was analyzed. Their ability to form bonds not just with their own species, but with others. Their tendency to adopt behaviors and characteristics from cultures they encountered. Their psychological resilience. The ability to experience trauma and continue functioning. We are adaptable, David's voice explained. We bond with anything. We learn from everything. We survive conditions that should destroy us because we change ourselves to match those conditions. This makes us unpredictable. It also makes us nearly impossible to eliminate. The psychology file was perhaps the most disturbing. It detailed humanity's capacity for both extreme violence and extreme compassion, often from the same individuals. It showed soldiers who killed efficiently in combat, but wept for the enemy wounded. It showed mothers who would die protecting their children, but also women who led armies. It showed artists who created beauty and scientists who created destruction. Human psychology does not follow binary patterns, David's voice explained. We are not peaceful or violent. We are both simultaneously all the time. We contain multitudes within ourselves. This is what makes us dangerous. We can switch between states rapidly depending on necessity. The Sether delegate dimmed its glow. How does their civilization remain stable with such volatile psychology? The hologram showed families, communities, systems of law and culture that channel human nature into productive outlets. Through structure, David's voice said, through teaching, through choice. Which brings us to the final file. Terex hesitated before opening the Guardian Protocol file. Something about the human's tone suggested that this was the crucial information, the reason for everything they had watched. He activated it, and the display changed completely. What appeared was not historical footage or medical scans. It was a schematic, a complex diagram showing psychological conditioning programs, educational frameworks, cultural modifications, and technological limiters. All of it designed around a single purpose, controlling human aggression while maintaining human capability. Project Guardian, David's voice said, his tone carrying a weight that made the translation system struggle to convey the emotion behind it. Initiated 85 years ago when humanity first achieved faster-than-light travel and made contact with the Confederacy. The hologram zoomed into specific sections of the schematic. Every human born in the last 85 years has undergone Guardian conditioning. It begins in childhood with education designed to emphasize cooperation over competition, dialogue over violence, patience over aggression. It continues through adolescence with psychological frameworks that redirect violent impulses into productive activities. It is reinforced through every level of our society. The display showed statistics. Crime rates had dropped by 70%, military forces that were one-tenth the size they had been before contact, conflict resolution systems that prevented wars before they started. Guardian is not just education. David's voice continued. It is a complete restructuring of how humanity interacts with itself and others. It is why we have been peaceful, why we have followed Confederacy protocols even when they made no sense, why we have smiled and accepted being treated as inferior by species who judge us based on age rather than capability. The hologram showed more data, brain scan patterns that indicated active suppression of aggressive responses, hormone regulation systems that modulated emotional extremes, social structures that rewarded patience and punished violence. The Vorn representative made a sound like rocks splitting. They chemically alter their own brains? That is extreme. The hologram shifted to show volunteers, humans who had chosen to undergo Guardian conditioning. No, David's voice said. We do not force this. Every human has a choice to accept Guardian protocols or reject them. Approximately 98% of our population chooses to accept it because we remember what we were before. We remember the wars and the weapons and the world we almost destroyed. We choose to be better than what evolution made us. Ambassador Terex felt something he had not experienced in centuries, genuine fear. Then what we saw in the public chamber, your history of violence, that was humanity with these controls in place. The hologram showed the answer. Comparison data appeared, projections of what human expansion would look like without Guardian protocols. The numbers were staggering. Military forces 50 times larger, colony expansion 3 times faster, resource consumption quadrupled, conflict rates increased by factors of hundreds. No, David's voice said softly. What you saw was humanity before Guardian. What you judged was our past, not our present. What you threatened was a species that has spent 85 years choosing peace over our natural inclinations. The hologram changed again. Now it showed something that made every being in the chamber recoil. It was a simulation, a projection of what would happen if Guardian protocols were deactivated. Human military forces expanding from their current size to numbers that dwarf Confederacy fleets. Colony ships launching by the thousands instead of dozens. Resource extraction operations that would strip entire systems in years instead of decades. And warfare, human warfare without restrictions, spreading like a plague across any species that stood in their way. This is not a threat, David's voice said, and his tone was completely serious now. This is a mathematical projection based on our biology, our history, and our population size. 200 billion humans without Guardian protocols would revert to patterns established over 100,000 years of evolution. We would become what we were on Earth before we learned to control ourselves. We would expand without limit. We would fight without restraint. We would survive at any cost. Because that is what we were designed to do by a planet that tried to kill us for our entire existence. The simulation continued. It showed human forces overwhelming Confederacy, defenses not through superior technology, but through sheer numbers and absolute refusal to surrender. It showed colony worlds established in systems considered too dangerous for habitation. It showed humans adapting to environments that should be fatal, just as they had adapted to Earth's ice ages. It showed warfare that did not end when one side gained advantage, but continued until complete victory or complete extinction. The simulation ended with a galaxy divided into human territory and empty space. Everything else was gone. Ambassador Terex stood up from the table. His legs were shaking, something that should not be possible for a Krillian. This is exaggeration. No species could achieve this level of expansion. The hologram showed historical data, real human expansion rates before Guardian protocols. The projections matched perfectly. The Sether delegate was flickering rapidly, its energy form barely maintaining cohesion. Why are you showing us this? Why reveal your own weakness? If we know about these Guardian protocols, we can ensure they remain active. We can enforce them. David's face appeared in the hologram, looking directly at them. Because you need to understand what you were about to do. Your verdict in the public chamber would have dismantled Guardian. Your supervision would have been seen as occupation. Your reproductive restrictions would have been seen as genocide. Your technology regulations would have been seen as attempts to keep us weak. And faced with extinction, humanity would have made the same choice we have made every time our survival was threatened throughout our history. He paused. We would have removed the leash ourselves rather than let you hold it. The council chamber fell absolutely silent. The weight of what they had almost triggered settled over them like a physical force. David's image continued. Guardian exists because we wanted to join galactic civilization as partners, not conquerors. We wanted to prove that we could be more than survivors, that we could be builders and creators and friends. We spent 85 years controlling ourselves, restraining ourselves, limiting ourselves to show you that we could be trusted. And you responded by threatening to destroy us. His expression hardened. You made a mistake based on fear and ignorance. I am giving you the opportunity to correct it. The Voran representative spoke, its voice quieter than before. What happens now? David's image leaned forward. You have 48 hours to make a decision. You can withdraw your verdict, acknowledge that your judgment was based on incomplete information, and allow humanity to continue as we have been, peaceful, controlled, and limited by Guardian protocols. Or you can proceed with your plans to supervise and restrict us, in which case Guardian will be suspended and you will face what we really are. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I recommend the first option. The second one ends badly for everyone, but especially for you. The hologram deactivated. The data device powered down. The 15 council members sat in darkness for a moment before Terex activated the chamber's basic lighting. They looked at each other, species that had worked together for millions of years, and saw the same expression reflected in every face, fear mixed with something that might have been respect. We need to vote, Terex said finally, all in favor of withdrawing the verdict and issuing a formal apology to humanity. 15 appendages, tentacles, manipulators, and energy fields raised simultaneously. The vote was unanimous. 41 hours later, David Chin stood once again in the great public chamber. But this time the atmosphere was different. The guard were not present. The weapon systems were not active. The 15 platforms held the same representatives, but their postures had changed. They no longer looked down at the human in the circle. They looked at him as an equal, perhaps for the first time. Ambassador Terex spoke, his voice carrying none of the arrogance from before. Captain David Chun, the Galactic Confederacy has reviewed all evidence and has reached a new conclusion. Our previous verdict was based on incomplete understanding of human civilization and development. We withdraw all charges and all restrictions. He paused. We apologize for our error in judgment. David nodded slowly. Apology accepted, Ambassador. But let us be clear about what happens next. Humanity will continue our expansion at our own pace. We will continue to develop our technology according to our own timeline. We will continue to grow our population as we see fit. And we will continue to maintain Guardian protocols because we choose to, not because you require it. The Sether delegate shimmered forward. And if humanity chooses to deactivate these protocols at some future date, David met its gaze directly. Then we will inform you well in advance so you have time to evacuate any systems you wish to keep. But I do not believe that will happen. We built Guardian to be better than our evolution made us. We have no intention of abandoning that choice. The Voran representative spoke. What does humanity want from the Confederacy? David smiled, and this time was genuine. Partnership. Real partnership. We want access to Confederacy knowledge so we can continue growing and learning. We want trade agreements that treat us as equals. We want a seat at this table, not as a young species being supervised, but as full members contributing to galactic civilization. He looked around at all 15 platforms. We have spent 85 years proving we can control ourselves. Now we want the opportunity to prove what we can build when we work with you instead of under you. There was a long silence. Then Ambassador Terex did something unprecedented in the 4-million-year history of the Confederacy Council. He descended from his platform, walked across the ancient floor, and extended his primary manipulator to the human. David shook it. The first time a Confederacy representative and a human had touched as equals. Welcome to the Confederacy, Captain Chun. Not as subjects, but as partners. David smiled. Thank you, Ambassador. I think this is the beginning of something remarkable. As he left the chamber, David thought about the message he would send to Earth. The crisis was over. Guardian would remain active. Humanity would continue to choose peace over violence, cooperation over conquest. But now they would do it from a position of respect rather than subordination. The galaxy had learned what humanity truly was, what they were capable of if pushed, and what they chose to be instead. 3 months later, the first human was appointed to a Confederacy Research Council. 6 months after that, human engineers helped repair an ancient station that had been failing for centuries. Within a year, human diplomats were mediating disputes between species that had been enemies for millennia. They brought perspectives shaped by surviving impossible conditions, By choosing peace after experiencing war, by understanding both violence and compassion in equal measure, the galaxy changed slowly, but it changed. And at the center of that change was humanity, still running Guardian protocols, still choosing every day to be better than what evolution made them. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Because they understood something that older, more advanced species had forgotten. The greatest strength was not in the ability to destroy, but in the choice not to. David Chin watched all of this unfold from his office on Luna Base. He was 53 now, with more silver in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But he smiled as he read reports of human achievements and contributions to galactic society. They had taken a species bred in hell, designed by evolution to survive at any cost, and they had transformed it into something better. They had proven that choice was stronger than instinct, that what was more powerful than nature. And they had done it while keeping the capacity for violence carefully controlled, a reminder and a warning. We can be your partners. That warning said, we can help you build wonders. But never forget what we are underneath. Never push us to the point where we have to choose survival over civilization. Because if that day ever comes, the galaxy will learn what it means when humanity stops being polite and starts being what evolution designed us to be. For now, that day remained in the realm of simulation and warning. Humanity continued to grow, to learn, to contribute, always with Guardian protocols active, always with a leash firmly in place. And Confederacy, wiser for their near mistake, welcomed them as equals and hoped very sincerely that the leash would never need to be removed. Because they had seen the projections, they knew what waited on the other side of that choice. And they had no desire to meet it face to face in reality, rather than simulation. The galaxy had dodged annihilation not through strength, but through wisdom, through the choice to listen rather than judge, to understand rather than fear. And in doing so, they had gained allies who would prove more valuable than any of them could imagine. Humanity had delivered its warning. The Confederacy had been wise enough to heed it, and the future, though uncertain, was brighter for that wisdom than it would have been for pride. The story did not end with conquest or destruction. It ended with partnership and hope, and sometimes that was the most powerful ending of all.